They're schemers. Schemers trying to control their little worlds. I'm not a schemer. When the chips are down, these civilized people, they'll eat each other. And here we go.
Well, hello there. How is everyone? I hope you are all well. You amazing, beautiful, wonderful people. It is now, I don't know what day it is. It's Thursday. It's Thursday. And yesterday we saw the sentencing hearing of Bryan Kohberger. And now we are in the aftermath of such. So over the next few days, we will be covering various things around what we saw, what we heard, and what is going to come out in said aftermath. We will look at some of the docs if you wish to see some of the docs, as Moscow, Idaho Police Department have released a load of documents around the investigation. If you want to see that, if you want me to go through the docs, I know there are some other channels such as Jules who have been going through them, but if you want me to, let me know. If you're not interested, then we will not do it. There are other things that we can talk about. There are other cases out and about that are also worth talking about, so let me know down below. But we are going to talk about some of the things in the court today. First of all, in this video, we're going to talk about Steve Goncalves, and then later on today, we're just going to dip back into Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk, which could potentially be one of... It's going to be a room splitter, that one. Could be quite controversial what I have to say. So if you're not subscribed. If you haven't, smash like. Help get the video out to other people. It is free. So look, Steve Goncalves, he spoke yesterday. If you listen to the hearing, you will have heard what he had to say, and we'll talk about it. If you haven't, then by the end of this video, you won't really have to go and listen to it. But Steve Goncalves, for the most part, has been quite the mouthpiece. He's been, he's an angry father who has lost his child. And in that vein, I fully appreciate that this guy is, he's in pain. He's in pain. He's angry. And yesterday was his opportunity to sit in court and face to face with Bryan Kohberger. And how did Steve Goncalves choose to utilize this time? Did he take this as an opportunity to talk about Kaylee Goncalves and and celebrate her life, as we saw with Madison Mogen's grandmother, who, in my opinion, Madison Mogen's grandmother was the only person who actually did what I would call a victim impact statement, to tell everybody about Maddie and, and share some real insight into who Maddie was. But no, Steve Goncalves chose to, use that time to basically attack Bryan Kohberger and share some of his thoughts and feelings of Bryan himself. So let's just talk about that. So it says here, victim Kaylee Goncalves' dad tears into stupid Bryan Kohberger at emotional sentencing, saying nobody cares about you. The downside is, and again, these videos that I start to do here are going to be quite controversial. They are going to be quite controversial. Not everyone's going to like them. I did a community post yesterday that said, look, I appreciate people have differences of opinion. This channel isn't a memorial for victims. This is a channel that we allow people to have differing opinions and to be adult about it. If you can't be adult about it and understand that we all have different thoughts and feelings, and, this isn't just somewhere that we feel that we have to talk in a certain way. I'm not a soundboard for mainstream media narratives, and if you can't behave, then I will fuck you off. And that's just as simple as that. But look, there are people who do, sadly, and I say sadly because, look, the truth of the matter is Bryan Kohberger either did this and he did it alone, which we're going to talk about in a second, or he did this and he did it as part of more than one person. Is that possible? I still, at this stage, believe that to be possible, that he could have indeed been someone who did this crime with somebody else. Or, could he have done it on his own? Yes, he could have done it on his own. The point is that because of how this ended, we don't have a conclusion, not in my opinion. And we will talk on that in a second. And is there a possibility that Bryan Kohberger didn't do this crime at all? And in fact, he accepted guilt, if you like, and threw the towel in because he was fearful of the death penalty, and this was a way to save his life, as he was up against a clearly biased, media-driven narrative that would paint him as the killer before it even entered the courtroom, and the rest is a formality to get him in front of a firing squad. Again, however slim that is, I believe that is still a possibility. Do I think that he is innocent at this stage? And I will say that the more that I watched Bryan Kohberger yesterday, the more that I felt that Bryan Kohberger was likely to have the potential to be involved, but the crime itself, I still feel strongly that this is a crime that would have taken more than one person to action in the way that we saw it happen. And that's just me. That's my opinion. But it says, look, father of victim Kaylee Goncalves dismissed Bryan Kohberger as a joke during a powerful victim impact statement Wednesday. You're a joke, a complete joke, Steve Goncalves told Kohberger while ridiculing the lazy trail of evidence he left behind at the scene of his gruesome quadruple University of Idaho murder. You were that foolish, that careless, that stupid, Goncalves said, explaining how police told him Kohberger's DNA was found within minutes, along with footage of his car arriving and leaving the scene of the crime. We'll talk about that. Goncalves added that Kohberger attempted to divide people, but that his shocking crime did only unite the world. Today, we are here to prove to the world that you picked the wrong families, he said. Our actions have united everyone in their disgust for you. Today, you have no name, he concluded. Nobody cares about you. You're not worth the time, the effort to be remembered. In time, you'll be nothing but two initials forgotten to the wind. And look, this is the reality of it all. This is the absolute reality of it all. This is how I see it. Is Bryan Kohberger it's been stated that Bryan Kohberger is ASD, and what we saw in court was somebody with ASD who was very clearly showing a complete lack of emotion, and most likely because of said ASD. When he was told to speak or had the opportunity to speak, it was only to be asked if he wanted to say a statement, which he turned around and said that he respectfully declines. We now also are fully aware that he could, in fact, choose to appeal. Whether that appeal will be listened to, whether there will be ramifications to that, because ultimately he has entered into a plea deal that states that he is unable to appeal. So he was warned by Judge Hippler that there could be ramifications if he did. But look, he still can appeal. He has, I think, 40 days or approximately 40 days to launch an appeal. So we now sit and wait to see whether Bryan Kohberger does indeed start to make a move. It was quite strange in the courtroom to see Ann Taylor almost remain as emotionless at times, looking quite angry and sometimes even disgusted at some of the people who were talking about Bryan Kohberger, as we consistently saw the victim impact statements turn more into an opportunity just to try to vilify and attack on a personal level Bryan Kohberger, which, I get it. At the end of the day, a lot of these people in that courtroom yesterday, they do absolutely believe Bryan Kohberger to be the person who did this crime, and that is it. So this is perhaps their only opportunity that they'll ever get to be face-to-face and say what they have to say. And maybe it gives them some form of, I don't know, resolution to act strong in front of this person who they feel has taken a family member away from them. But ultimately, I think the sad thing is none of them fully understood the impact of ASD on Bryan Kohberger, and the fact that much of what they said, even if he is guilty of this crime, it just wouldn't have landed how they wanted it to land. You know, we're talking about somebody who we're saying walked into this house with absolutely no motive, absolutely no connection. There was interviews done after the hearing where law enforcement would literally say that there was no connection found. There was no social media connection, no nothing. Now, as a caveat to that, they did say that Bryan Kohberger had utilized, you know, some form of methodology to wipe phones, wipe equipment. So perhaps Bryan Kohberger had access to things that he felt could wipe things and leave him untraceable in terms of connections. And maybe that's why we don't see anything. But he went to all that length then to remove connections between himself and communications to the victims, but then purchased the knife from Amazon, took his phone on the night of the crime, drove his own car around the scene of the crime, getting caught on multiple cameras. So when Steve Goncalves stated to Bryan Kohberger that he's stupid, you could argue that if indeed Bryan Kohberger is the person who did this crime 100% and he did it on his own, then yes, I think that that is a warranted statement that Bryan Kohberger is potentially the most stupid killer that there is. The issue is where we sit at the moment. There are still questions around this case. Steve Goncalves would go on to thank law enforcement, thank the people around this case and the work that they did. Now, bearing in mind that Steve Goncalves has been on a tour around different media outlets to absolutely crucify and, you know, voice anger and disgust of the deal that they made with the devil, and that this should, and you know, and state that this should have gone to trial, which I absolutely feel that that was the route to go. I just find it very, very strange that Steve Goncalves walked into this courtroom and praised the very people that he's just spent the last few weeks absolutely attacking for basically removing real justice off the table. So, you know, I found that a little bit strange. You'll have to let me know what you thought around that. But look, Steve Goncalves said his piece. Was it a lot tamer than what I thought it was? Yes, the rest of his family did decline into somewhat strange, again, with Bryan Kohberger being ASD, so especially with Olivia and her speech that seemed to be more of an audition, and I say that respectfully. Bryan Kohberger is one of two things, and that is either he is someone who's got tied up in this and he's got ASD and none of this really sits with him, or he's a cold-blooded killer with ASD, and that was a complete waste of time. Maybe there'll be a book come out later. Oh, and also, it would seem that $5,000 is the price of a life, as Bryan Kohberger was handed down fines of $5,000 to be paid to each of the families. But on the flip side of that coin, also around $250,000 to be paid to the state. Go figure. Let me know how you feel about that. How is he going to pay it? Surely he's going to have to be allowed to do books to obtain an income. Check out the video later as we talk about Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk. Love you all.